Good afternoon, sir. So thank you very much for really accepting our request and taking off your time to spend with my students. I now request one of my students, Debroti, to introduce you to the whole class. We have around 32 students in this class, but at the moment, I think there are only 13 people. I think a few more will join soon. But it's a seminar course, so it's a small class. Some people have connectivity issues, so we record this and then make it available to us, to them, for them to view later. But we will start the session anyway. We won't be able to wait for them now. So
I have now all the time in the world. Let me sort of apologize to you, Professor Manohar, as well as all the students, that I'm sorry I got a little delayed. I try and be punctual on such occasions, but I got late coming in from Delhi, and that's it. We can extend it for as long as you like. I'm till 5 or beyond, if you like.
yeah, I think our students will have questions after your session, and then we will. Yeah. Debrati, can you please introduce Paranjoy Guha quickly?
Yes, sir. So first of all, let me say we are really excited that you're here, Paranjoy, sir. So let me say a few words on him. Paranjoy Guha Thakurta's professional career started in June 1977 as a print journalist. His work experience, spanning more than 4 decades, cuts across different mass media: the written word, the spoken word, and the audiovisual medium, printed publications on websites, radio and podcasts, television, and documentary cinema. He's a writer, speaker, anchor, interviewer, teacher, analyst, commentator, publisher, producer, director, and consultant. Much of his work is in 3 languages: English, Bengali, and Hindi. He has published and been published in other languages as well. His main areas of interest are the working of the political economy and the media in India and the world, on which he has authored and co-authored books and directed and produced documentary films. In particular, he examines the allocation and pricing of natural resources and the working of crony capitalism and oligarchies in India. He teaches and speaks on these subjects to students, general audiences, and also trains aspiring and working media professionals. He participates frequently in and organizes seminars and conferences. He is a regular contributor to publications and websites. He is featured on television channels and radio programs as an anchor as well as an analyst and commentator.
Yeah. So thank you, Debroti, for that introduction. Over to Mr. Paranjoy.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Sir, one small announcement that our students attend classes from morning to afternoon, so it takes a lot of data, and they usually save the data by keeping the video off. So that's why we don't see many people, but you can see the names.
Yeah, I'm using this particular WebEx for the first time. I've been using Zoom and Google, so
Yeah.
I'm also I'm not fully conversant with the working of this particular well, what should I say? Means of a virtual meeting, and I will be happy if you also shared the video. I mean, once you've recorded it, if you can send a copy to me.
Sure.
So I'll also know.
I'll do that, yeah.
Okay, so essentially what Professor Manohar has already briefed me, students, is that you have already, as students, studied a little bit about what is fake news, misinformation, and you've also seen the film called Great Hack. And you also are conversant a little bit, I presume, with some of the issues pertaining to privacy and free speech. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give you an overview of how the internet, how the World Wide Web has completely and very dramatically altered the media scenario in the world and also in India. After that, I'm going to look specifically at India, what has happened, how is India in some ways unique or different from other countries in the world. So I'll first look at the global picture, then I'll talk about what's happening in India. Thereafter, I'll talk to you a little bit about paid news. So fake news is one category, but paid news, news which is not really news, which is really advertising, but which is made to appear as news. So that will be a little, I will talk a little bit about this. And I have already given Professor Manohar links to a report of a subcommittee of the Press Council of India. I was a member of that committee. I was one of the authors of that report, and it did arouse quite a lot of contention and controversy at the time it was submitted. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And in the third and the final part of my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that's very, very topical, and that is Facebook. I've written this book. It was published, I've co-authored this book. This book came out in April of 2019, and suddenly it is in the news all over again. I've deposed before the committee, a committee of the Assembly of Delhi. I've also appeared before the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information Technology. So we'll talk a little bit about Facebook in India specifically. And since you people have already seen the great hack and you know a little bit about the Cambridge Analytica episode, so I will sort of add to that and talk about what's happening in India. And as I've already informed your professor, let me tell you that I'm not a lawyer. My son wants to be a lawyer, but I am not very, I mean, you people are far more conversant and informed about the law and the fine print of the law. So I'm going to look at all these issues from a wider economic, political, and social perspective as to how mass communications and the media has been impacted. The first thing is the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is really not very old, it's very young. It's just around 30 years old. But the real exponential increase in the usage of the internet has really happened over the last 15 years or thereabouts. So, yes, the World Wide Web existed more than 30 years ago, but it's expanded and expanded dramatically really over the last 15 years and particularly over the last 10 years or so. And today we have a situation where you could say close to 2/3 of the population of the world. The actual figure is a little lower. It's probably closer to about somewhere around 60%, maybe a little more. These are, again, estimates, or some would say even guesstimates. They are not even firm estimates. But if you visit a website called World Internet Statistics, you will get some idea of the numbers. So this doesn't tell you the full story. Because whereas there are countries like Japan, South Korea, the United States, Germany, where you have very, very high internet connectivity and as a proportion of the population, well over 90%, in some cases 95% of the population or more is connected to the internet. So when I say 60% of the population of the planet, which is a little over 7 billion at this particular point of time, I'm talking about people who would have used the internet at least once. And it's important to know that even now, those who have not used the internet, their lives are getting affected. For instance, take a poor person in India who does not have a mobile phone with internet connectivity, but she or he may have to use the internet to access some public service. It could be food from the local ration shop, it could be getting an Aadhaar card, it could be getting some other service. So even their lives are getting impacted by the internet. Now, when people like Tim Berners-Lee, the person who really invented what we call the URL, the Universal Resource Locator, where you click on an icon and your computer gets connected to other computers. And individuals like Vinton Cerf, they are sort of like considered to be like the fathers and the grandfathers of the internet. 30 years ago, they envisaged the internet to be a great liberating force for humanity. They felt that the internet could educate people, inform people, provide them knowledge, and not only that, I mean, it would actually empower individuals. It would help democratize society. Authoritarian societies would get weakened. So it was considered to be a great liberating force for humankind. And yes, indeed, the internet has changed human society and humankind in ways we could never imagine. Today, in the palm of my hand, in my smartphone, I have my newspaper, my weekly magazine, my monthly, my library of books, what used to be my radio station, what used to be my television channel, and much more. Because it's not just a medium of mass communication, it's also a medium of personalized communication. So I can buy what I want to, I can gift something to somebody located 10,000 miles away. I can do a host of activities. I can banking transactions, I can buy things, I can order things, I can sell things using the internet. But the point to note is, contrary to what the founding fathers of the internet believed, of this great force of the internet to liberate humankind, to empower the underprivileged, to bring about democracy in societies across the world, we could not have imagined that the internet would emerge as a double-edged sword. As a double-edged sword that would cut both ways. It's a bit like what radio did in Rwanda, where it was abused for genocide, to demonize an entire community of people. Why do I mention Rwanda? Because radio and even television remain major communication means. So even if in the US or in Canada or in Japan and Germany and South Korea, the numbers are huge. If you look at the entire continent of Africa, there are 54 countries in the entire continent of Africa. You will find pockets where internet penetration is very, very low, maybe 25%, maybe 30%. And within that continent, you'll find wide variations. When you look at the two most populous countries in the world, India and China, these two countries between them account for roughly 40% of the population of the planet. You find China today, the internet penetration is close to 2/3, is above 60%. In India, it's a little below 50%. Now, this shows you how ubiquitous and how widespread the internet is. But the main point to note, and this is what I wanted to say, very few could have imagined that the internet would be dominated just by a few conglomerates. The infamous FAANG FAN, Facebook, Alphabet, Apple, Amazon, and for Netflix. If you don't like Alphabet, use G, Google. Let's look at just two of these giant corporate conglomerates. Facebook, and when I say Facebook, I'm going to talk more about Facebook later, but Facebook is Facebook plus YouTube, Facebook plus WhatsApp plus Instagram. When you talk about Alphabet, you're talk about the Google family of products and services. You're also talking about YouTube, and most importantly, a lot of people don't realize, is Google is also the owner of the Android operating system, and which is the most widely used operating system on mobile phones. So if you look at just these 6 platforms, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Google, YouTube, and the Android system, These 6 platforms would account for over 90% of all the traffic that moves across the internet at any given point of time outside the People's Republic of China. That's how large these two corporate conglomerates are. And those of you who are more interested in the subject, I would strongly recommend that you read a book written by an American scholar called Shoshana Zuboff, Shoshana, and her surname is Zuboff, Zuboff. And her book is really about what she says. This is the age of surveillance capitalism. Now, Facebook gives you a service free, Google gives you a service free. How are they making so much money? They make huge amounts of money through selling data about you, your behavior, to advertisers. And if you look at the total expenditure on advertising, you'll find that these two organizations alone, Facebook and Google, would account for around 2/3 of all the advertising that is today happening. And that includes newspapers and television and billboards and point of sale, etc., etc. So from literally very little, it's now a dominant player. Now, I'm going to come to this issue of advertising, and I'm going to link this to fake news very shortly. But I'm just giving you this as a background to tell you how very few people could have imagined that these two giant conglomerates, who are among the biggest conglomerates on the planet, would have such an influence of what you read, what you hear, what you watch. It's not just what you buy, what films you see, what songs you hear, the way you think, including your thought processes, your behavior, your political ideology, and so on and so forth. Now, let's move quickly up to what happened in 2008. Wall Street collapsed. It was a great recession. Now we are in the middle of a bigger recession. One of the impacts of what happened in 2008 was a sharp decline in advertising, expenditure on marketing and marketing services. This had a huge impact on the revenues of mainstream media, newspapers, radio, television. Take a newspaper. A newspaper that you would purchase for 3 or 4 rupees, the newspaper company would earn 95% of its revenues from advertising, and therefore was able to give it to you, that newspaper, at such a low cost. Because if you exclude that, then the cost of production of that same newspaper, instead of 3 rupees or 4 rupees, would have been 30 rupees or 40 rupees. So the advertising-driven model of the media got completely broken, or was already sort of in a bad shape after 2008. And 12 years later, after COVID and the greater recession, it's completely broken and finished. This means that media and media organizations have to completely rethink themselves. Now, another important thing that has happened in this 12-year period is the exponential rise in the use of the internet. And the use of the internet has a 1 or 2 distinct characteristics, and that has a direct bearing to fake news. And that's why I've given this long preface to my talk to bring you to the topic. Intellectual property rights, IPR, copyright. Now, if you want everything free, what you read, what you hear, what you watch, what the pictures you see, the cartoons you watch, the videos you see, who pays the writer? Who pays the videographer? Who pays the cartoonist? Who pays the answer? Let me give you an analogy. My generation of people and Professor Manohar's generation of people, we would actually go to shops and buy vinyl discs. We would buy audio cassettes like this. And not only that, we would not only buy audio cassettes, we'd be buying CDs after this, compact discs like this. And we would pay money. we would pay money to listen to the music that we wanted to hear. All of our students over here, I guarantee you, Professor, they haven't spent a single naya paisa on the music they hear. It's from YouTube, it's downloaded, it's pirated. One person has got linked to some site, whatever, Spotify, Ghana, this and that, and everybody else is sharing. Some of them are a little kind to the musicians, and maybe on their ring phone, they've given a small amount of money for their favorite songs. This is the same generation of people who will spend thousands of rupees to watch a music concert. And where a Coca-Cola will cost a few hundred rupees, and a terrible tasting burger would cost equally as much as that. So they're willing to pay for the experience, not for the music. Why do I say this? If you, the viewer, if you, the reader, if you, the consumer, you don't want to pay for what you watch, what you hear, and what you read, then you're going to be bombarded by fake news or information that is motivated. Propaganda could be a political party, advertising, it could be a commercial organization trying to sell you a product or a service, and most importantly, information whose credibility you are not sure of. Information that could be half true, could be completely false. Now, why is this so important today? It's not that this is the first time in this world or in this country that we are getting such a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And let me here make a distinction for you between misinformation and disinformation. Though these two words are usually often conflated, misinformation is false information, wrong information. You can be genuinely misinformed. You may think that, Kankana Ranaut hasn't said anything, hasn't compared Mumbai with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, whereas she may have. You may actually think she hadn't. You might be genuinely misinformed. But disinformation is information that is false, but nevertheless propagated for a particular purpose. So if you are a supporter of this lady Kangana Ranaut, you are saying that she's, she's going to be attacked. If she comes to Mumbai, the Shiv Sainiks are going to come and beat her up or whatever. That could be construed as propaganda, but there could be far more egregious examples of propaganda where information that is false is deliberately put out in the public domain for a particular purpose. Let me give you a classic case of a statement that is Islamophobic, you might call. Islamophobic, India, 1 out of 7 Indians they are Muslim. There are more Muslims in India than in all but 2 countries, all but 1 country in the world, and that's Indonesia. We have more Muslims than in Pakistan and also in Bangladesh. But wait, a few years ago, a young nephew of mine came up to me and he calls me Mosaji because he's the son of my wife's older sister. And she said, not all Muslims are terrorists. Not all Muslims are terrorists. But all terrorists are Muslim. I said, oh my God, who told you this? He said, WhatsApp, Facebook. I said, really? Have you heard of Pragya Singh Thakur? Are you aware of the people who killed Gauri Lankesh? You're in Gauri Lankesh's city. I knew her. Today is the 3rd anniversary of her murder, her brutal murder. And he says, oh, is that so? As Ravish Kumar points out, and I'm here like coming to India, is that there is an entire generation of people who've not had the privilege that people like you have had, or being educated in a quality educational institution by teachers who are qualified to teach. They've grown up in WhatsApp University. Now, let me give you how important this is in today's India. So let me move from a problem which is global to a problem which is now in India. Now, the problem of disinformation, the problem of misinformation, the problem of propaganda, the problem of fake news is global. And to be fair, it's there across the world. Complete lack of consideration of intellectual property rights, of copyright, etc., etc. Even YouTube used to have this problem once upon a time. Now they've tightened the rules. But when you have such technology, the difference is earlier there were rumors, earlier there was propaganda, earlier there was misinformation and disinformation. This is a story which is decades, if not centuries old. There are people who've traced information in newspapers published many, many decades ago, which was completely false, figments of people's imagination. What's the difference? The difference is the scale and the speed with which information travels. That's the difference. And fake news travels much faster than real news. Once you put out that this is fake news, the retraction, the clarification, when you tell people that, look, this is not true, this is not genuine, this information is not credible, that information doesn't travel as quickly and doesn't travel as wide as fake news does. That is an important defining characteristic of false, fake, untruthful disinformation and misinformation. Let's come to India. I'm taking a little longer than I presumed, but is it okay, Professor, if I speak till about 4 o'clock and then I can have as many for as
Yeah,
right.
that should be fine. And many of the things I think you are discussing, we had in fact discussed before. For example, even the last example that you have given, the difference, because since we have spent some 14, 15 hours.
Okay.
Many
Let me
of
move.
these were
Let me
discussed.
move a little faster.
Yeah.
Let me move a little faster so that I don't go over the ground that you've already been through.
Yeah.
So the first point is, what is unique about India? Yes, India has 1.35 billion people. In a few years from now, there will be more people in India than even in China. The difference in India is that we have a very, very young population. The median age of India is somewhere around 26 or 27. About half your population is below that age. That makes India unique. Why is that unique? Because the younger generation, including all of you who are listening to me, consume the social media. You consume information on your mobile phones more than others. Look at the numbers. When this country became politically independent, a telephone, a landline, was a luxury. We used to say dial a number. Now, a lot of you don't know what a dial is because now you're used to keying buttons. But what we've seen is over the last 20 years, a dramatic increase in the number of people using mobile phones. So, in a country of 1.35 billion, 135 crore, according to the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, you have 1.15 billion or 115 crore SIMs, subscribers. SIM is an acronym for Subscriber Identity Module, that little chip that goes into your machine. Now, when you look at the numbers, as on the 1st of January 2019, there were approximately 90 crore or 900 million Indians who were eligible to vote. That means they were above the age of 18. They were eligible to vote in the Lok Sabha elections that took place that year. And compare this number to the number of mobile phones in this country. One estimate, again, these are guesstimates and not firm estimates, would be around 750. Some will say a little more, some say a little less, but certainly 750 million handsets exist. So just as in many parts of the country, including the city where you are in, Hyderabad, there are more SIMs than human beings. I'm sorry, I mentioned Bangalore. I made that as a mistake. Please, I stand corrected. Gauri Lankesh was from Bengaluru. You people are from Hyderabad, or many of you are from. But in most urban areas, there are more Sims than human beings. The use of mobile phones is no longer an upper class phenomenon. It's spread across the length of breadth of India to rural areas to remote areas. So, when you say there are 900 million voters and 750 million handsets, you know how many users of WhatsApp there are? More than 400 million. That's how powerful this medium is. And this, I would say, why do I single out WhatsApp? Because this has been the single biggest disseminator of fake news. All right, let's move quickly on to this whole issue of paid news. Paid news is, in a sense, a kind of fake news because you are masquerading advertising as news. People have a notion of what is news. It's information that's been verified, that's factually correct, which is quote unquote objective, balanced, independently gathered. That's what people's idea of news is. But when you have advertising, but which pretends to be news, you have a major problem. Because this undermines the whole, our entire democratic system. Because when it happens before elections, it's aimed at influencing political preferences. Just as Facebook has been and Cambridge Analytica has been using their platforms to influence political preferences and political choices and voters' voting behavior. Now, this has become widespread. And even the Election Commission has had to take notice about this. But when we prepared a report almost 10 years ago, people said, no, nothing can be done about this because this is all covert. I mean, none of it is on record. I mean, if a media company is being paid by a particular individual standing for election, or a political party, or even a company, there are no checks, there are no invoices, there are no bills. Everything is under the table. It's covert. So that is what has happened in many parts of the country. And the biggest names in the newspaper industry have been accused of these allegations. There are some people who've institutionalized it, like Bennett Coleman Company Limited, Times of India. They call it brand equity, where they have a system where you are not sure whether what you're seeing on the so-called page 3 of the city supplements is actually being paid for. Now, I mean, we have found many examples of essentially what you lawyers would describe as circumstantial evidence to indicate that this is not news, but this has been paid for. A particularly brazen, blatant example that we cited in our report was a page of a newspaper called the Gujarat Samachar, the Gujarati newspaper, which is also published out of Mumbai. On one particular day, we found on the same page of the newspaper 2 articles saying 2 candidates who were contesting against each other in the elections. There were 2 articles, both were saying both are expected to win with a huge margin. It's amazing that both were willing and they were competing against each other. There were examples that were pointed out by P. Sainath, who was that time the rural affairs editor of the Hindu newspaper. He pointed out how the former chief minister of Maharashtra, Ashok Chavan, there were competing Marathi newspapers that published identical articles with a different name of a byline. And this case dragged all the way from the Election Commission to the Supreme Court, and finally nothing could be proved. But there were other examples where things were proved, and there was a particular lady who was actually barred for the first time from contesting elections because she had not declared what was clearly advertising in her budget, in her expenditure statement before the Election Commission of India. And should you want to, and if you want me to elaborate during the question and answer session, I could elaborate on why the Election Commission of India has failed to place curbs on political advertising on the social media and on uh, and on fake news in general. And I mean, I've written about this and I can talk to you at some length if any of you are interested. But let me now, I've fast forwarded everything because your professor said that it's more important for me to answer your questions. So let me quickly talk to you a little bit about Facebook. As I mentioned, Facebook is one of the biggest corporations in the world. According to the ranking by Fortune and Forbes, it's somewhere in the top 10. Sometimes it's 5, so 6, sometimes it's 8. These rankings keep varying because it's based on market capitalization. That means the price of the share of the company to the total number of shares. Facebook is a very young company. It's just 16 and a half years old. The founder of Facebook is a very young person. He's a little older than some of you guys. He's just about 36 years old. And in this time, this has become one of the biggest corporations on the planet. Now, Facebook has faced a lot of criticism because in the name of free speech, the First Amendment to the Constitution of India, which is also enshrined in India's Constitution, Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, which is free speech. The fundamental right every citizen has to freedom of expression, to express themselves freely, which is today, and how you interpret Article 19(2) is again become a very, very contentious issue. But in the name of privacy and free speech, Facebook and its own community standards have come for a lot of criticism. Let me give you a few examples before we come to India. In Myanmar, Facebook and WhatsApp was misused to spread hatred against the Rohingyas. And when this was widely reported in the New York Times, the United Nations sent an officer who inquired and came out with a report. And after that report came out, Facebook had to apologize because fake, false information, it's not just fake and false information, it is information that we call inflammatory or incendiary, or essentially what we say, hate speech. Information that arouses people to violent acts against a particular community. In India, in the Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure, we have clear cases that has clear mention. If you say something, if you write something, if you publicly pronounce something which has the potential to cause unrest among two social classes, well, that is an offense. That's a criminal offense. This is what happened in Myanmar, for which Facebook had to apologize. Let me come to another example that took place a few years ago in Christchurch in New Zealand. A gunner killed over 50 people outside 2 mosques, and this was broadcast live. Then the whole issue rose about what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. What can you broadcast live and what can you not broadcast live? Look at what happened very recently in the United States of America. The US President Donald Trump put out certain information which was put down by Twitter, but it remained on Facebook. Why were they controversial? Because this was a time, many cities in the United States, there were protests against the killing of George Floyd, and there's a movement, and which is still on, which is called Black Lives Matter. And it was felt that the President of the US, his tweets were redacted, but the information that he put out would actually incite violence and police violence against ordinary citizens. So Facebook refused to put it down despite the opposition of sections within its own employees. Now, this is something that has happened recently in India. We've had references about how employees of Facebook in India said that certain posts were inflammatory, incendiary, hateful, and at the intervention of top officials of Facebook in India, notably Ms. Akhi Das, these were not put down. Very recently, after many, many complaints, the posts of T. Raja Singh, who you might know, he's a member of the Legislative Assembly of Telangana, and he's made a number of hateful comments against Muslims, including Rohingyas. So he was finally declared a dangerous individual. And then he says, look, I don't have any Facebook posts. There's somebody else who's put it in my name. That's what Mr. T. Raja Singh said. There were two other people. One was Kapil Mishra, who allegedly made speeches before the Hindu-Muslim riots in Northeast Delhi, which were very, very controversial. And the other person has also made a number of very controversial speeches. His name is Anand Kumar Hegde. Now, after the Wall Street Journal sent a questionnaire to Facebook in India, they pulled down some of these posts. The question is, why didn't they act? And this is not a question only of violating the Indian Penal Code or the CRPC, but a violation of Facebook's own community standards. The question then would arise, what is the way forward? These are what? Algorithm driven? But who designs these algorithms? They're human beings. Where does human intervention come in? I cite this as a trivial but not so funny example. I mean, I have been trolled on Twitter, and people say UMCBC. Now, most Indians will know what MC and BC is all about, but probably not the algorithm. The algorithm might think MC is master of ceremonies, BC is before Christ. So, human intervention is often called for. We don't know how this is done. Can machines prevent the spread of fake news? Can machines prevent the spread of hateful information? I'll give you just a few examples from India, two examples to illustrate my point. I here submit that behind virtually each and every case of mob lynching in different parts of India, in Rajasthan, in Uttar Pradesh, in Jharkhand, in Karnataka, and other places, there has been a hateful speech, a hateful WhatsApp message. There's been a hateful post on Facebook. Facebook you can control. WhatsApp you can't. WhatsApp is supposed to have end-to-end encryption technology. So WhatsApp says, we don't know who's the person who's put it out. We don't know to who it has gone. Now, one group can have over 250 people. So one message or one video or one picture can go at one go to 250 plus people. 256, I think, is the number. You can have 5 groups, so multiply that by 5. That's been 5 clicks of the button. Now, mob lynching, Hindu-Muslim riots from Delhi, Northeast Delhi, to Bangalore, to Muzaffarnagar, there have been numerous instances of how Facebook and WhatsApp has been misused. Let me give you 2 examples, and after that I'll be happy to take your questions. I finished a little earlier than I presumed I would. Let me tell you that not very long ago in the state of Rajasthan, in a district called Rajsamand, a particular man who now they say was deranged, he killed a laborer from Bengal who happened to be Muslim in the name of love jihad. I'm sure you know what this is all about. But what is important is that the gruesome, horrible, horrific scene of this man getting killed, burnt and killed, was actually videographed, possibly by a relative of his, and then widely circulated. Now, this was the issue. Can this be used as evidence? Ravi Shankar Prasad, our minister, asked Facebook traceability, and they said, no, this is end-to-end encryption technology. We don't know who's said it. So I said, what if there's a heinous crime that has been committed? A murder, a rape. Yes, today WhatsApp messages are being used as evidence in courts of law, but the only way you can get that is if the police or the law enforcing agencies or the law enforcing authorities actually seize your mobile phone. If, on the other hand, you erased all this information, then they won't get it. If you haven't backed it up on a cloud, then they won't get it. Now, let's look at another example of how this has been used for political purposes. And you might say I'm biased. Yes, okay, then maybe I'll acknowledge that I'm biased. But this whole the ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, has made use of the social media the most, and that is why when the Wall Street Journal article came and Time.com brought out another article, Wall Street Journal brought out a series of articles. Other newspapers, including Indian Express, have brought it out. Any of you are interested in this book, you're most welcome. You can pick it up from Amazon or Flipkart. If you want a signed copy from me, then you have to write to me. Then I'll sign it, give me your address, and I'll send you my bank account details. It's Paranjoy, Paranjoy @gmail.com. We've documented how the social media has been misused for political purposes, largely by the ruling party, but every party has made attempts. Now, I told you about the dangers of learning at WhatsApp University, which Ravish Kumar talked about. In the very first chapter of the book, I talk about how WhatsApp has become a weapon of disinformation, a weapon of fake news, a weapon used to propagate and disseminate fake news. On the 22nd of September 2018, speaking at a public rally for social media volunteers of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the then president of the party, Mr. Amit Shah, who happens to be today the Home Minister of India, he had made a remark. I quote him: "We are capable of delivering any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake. Meetha ya khatta, sach ya jhoot." He spoke in Hindi. You can get his whole speech on YouTube. This was in Kota in Rajasthan. Now, to understand these remarks in a certain context, Amit Shah had said that before the assembly elections had taken place in Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous province, in February and March 2017, the BJP had put up these groups of supporters. And a total number of 32 lakhs, 3.2 million users. And every morning at 8 in the morning, they would be sent these messages to know the truth about false information. And this is really the ironical part of the story. Now, one particular BJP volunteer, he put out a bit of fabricated information, completely fake news. And what was it? He said that the then Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Akhilesh Yadav, had slapped his father, Mulayam Singh Yadav. Now, the fact was that Mulayam Singh Yadav was 300 kilometers away from where Akhilesh Yadav was. But people believed him. And this went viral. And he said, Amit Shah said, even reached him. And then he said a mahal or an environment had been created. As members in the audience smirked, Amit Shah almost lovingly chided them. And he said in Hindi, "ये आप कर सकते हैं, मगर मत करिए." आप समझ रहे हैं मेरा बात? This is something worth doing, but don't do it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, when you have 32 lakh people on your WhatsApp groups, you know how a message can go viral. But interestingly, WhatsApp says no. Most people are using it as it's a personal messaging service. I argue that is no longer the case. That WhatsApp is being misused as a means of spreading information. So, to tie up my presentation, I want to tell you that this is going to become and is already a huge social issue in India and across the world. The inability to distinguish between what is true and what is false. People often say we are living in a post truth world. People are not interested in the truth, people are only interested in opinions. Donald Trump good, Donald Trump bad. Narendra Modi good, Narendra Modi bad. People are running away from facts, factual analysis. We see across the world demagogues. What is a demagogue? A demagogue is a political leader who seeks political support not on the basis of facts or factually correct information and analysis, but on emotional appeals. Take Donald Trump as a classic example. He has convinced many Americans that Mexicans are taking away their jobs. And so what they need is this great wall to prevent Mexicans from coming in. So I'm saying we are seeing this across the world. Lies being propagated not just by ordinary people, but people who are supposed to be very, very important political leaders. According to I mean, Trump loves using fake news. For Trump, anybody who criticizes him is fake news. CNN is fake news, Washington Times is fake news, New York Times is fake news. And they have documented that in the last 4 years of his presidency, almost 4 years, the elections are going to take place in November, that there have been thousands of instances where the president himself has propagated, disseminated fake news. So I am here saying that this has become a huge problem across the world and also in Indian society. And I think the only way forward is not simply regulation. You know, when Mark Zuckerberg was asked to depose before the American lawmakers, they asked him, Mr. Zuckerberg, will you tell us which hotel you stayed in? How much money did you pay for the suite you stayed in? What food did you eat? Will you tell us who are the people you send messages to? And he kept quiet. You respect your privacy? Do you respect our privacy? Where Mr. Mark Zuckerberg lives in Silicon Valley, in California, when he bought his home, he bought up a huge tract of land all around it. He respects his privacy. Does he respect your privacy? Your data has become his, Shoshana Zuboff calls it a behavioral surplus for them to monetize. Some people steal it and misuse it like Cambridge Analytica, but they are using it to make money. And the sad part of it is if fake news goes viral, it's good for Facebook. Virality is a key aspect of their business model. They don't care whether that information is fake or correct. They are more concerned that it reaches as many people as possible. This is the unfortunate reality of the post-truth world that we live in. And what's happening across the world is having a profound influence on Indian society as well. For reasons which I've outlined, it's almost 4 o'clock, so I've been speaking for about 55 minutes. Professor Manohar, I may have spent some time overlapping, and you people are already aware of some of the things I've taught, but it's now, I'll be happy to answer any question, any number of questions on any subject.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. Maybe before I open up to the students asking questions, maybe I could just let you know some of the questions we had already discussed, and probably I would ask what you think about such questions. One thing that came up in the previous discussions was not just BJP, but any party probably would do the same thing. So how do we then respond to such a situation?
So if all political parties are going to misuse it, I think the only way forward is education, greater awareness, making people aware what is truth and what is falsehood, what is propaganda, what is reality. Now, this is not easy. So education, awareness, these are the only ways forward. If political parties, and why only political parties? Why not commercial organizations? All along they've used it. I mean, you want to say, yes, Colgate is the best, Coca-Cola is the best. Pepsi says, no, Pepsi is the best. The point is, today in India, we have a large number of organizations which are supposed to be regulatory authorities. But they are all sort of, their work overlaps. And there's complete anarchy that is prevailing. This is a statutory regulation. And then you have self-regulation. What are the statutory regulatory authorities? You have the censor board, also called the Central Board of Film Certification. It's supposed to certify this film is for adults, this film is for universal viewing, this film is for restricted viewing. You can actually make a documentary where you show a person's heart being cut up, and it's only going to be shown to heart surgeons and medical practitioners, or you can show a woman giving childbirth, but it will be only shown to a very, very restricted audience of gynecologists. So you have a certification system. Then you have the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which is supposed to be a technical and a commercial regulator. Now that's another story about how well it does its job or does not do its job. Then you have the ministry itself, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which is the license, which, say television licenses are given by them. There are about 900 television licensees. They have permission to uplink or downlink. About 300 of them claim they are news and current affairs. I don't know after COVID how many will survive. Maybe many will fall by the wayside. And then you have the Registrar of Newspapers of India. They all come under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Then you have a body called the Press Council of India, of which I was a member for 3 years. It's a quasi-judicial body set up by an Act of Parliament, but its writ does not go beyond the printed medium.
Yeah.
Therefore, it has no say in television, internet, etc. Then you have the CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team, which is part of MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Now, they actually have the power to block URLs. And they did. If you recall, in Bangalore, there was a scare that students from Northeast were going to be targeted, and so they actually blocked URLs. So we have a multiplicity of statutory regulatory authorities, and then we have self-regulatory bodies like the Advertising Standards Council of India, the BCCC, the Broadcast Consumers Complaints Council. Then we have the NBA, that's the National Broadcasters Association. You have the IBF. These are all self-regulatory bodies, but self-regulation works up to a point. Essentially, what we have is regulatory chaos. But most importantly, we are today living in the day and age of convergence. As I started by saying, today, all media is in the palm of your hand. So, sir, I've given you a long answer to your question. So whether it's the BJP, whether it be other political parties, whether it be commercial organizations, they are going to exploit the gullibility of people to put out fake and tendentious information. It's up to educated consumers, aware citizens. That's the only way forward. It's not an easy way, but that's the only way forward.
Yeah, see, I was wondering, most of the fake news that I see are most effectively used for whatever intended purposes in the local regional languages. And whatever awareness that is coming up has been documented, for example, in like your book, for example, or your articles. Most of them are all in English. And in a country like India, where illiteracy is so high, when would digital literacy or digital education or awareness of these, how to cope with this, when do we actually reach them?
You have asked a very, very important question, Professor Manohar. This is indeed a very, very important question. Today, I mean, we know that India is the only country in the world with 17 languages on our currency note. That India is the only country in the world which has 22 languages, 21 languages in the 8th schedule, 22 languages that can be used for official purposes. English is not in the 8th schedule. In such a linguistically and socially and culturally diverse country, it's not enough to be able to say English, Hindi, or just a few languages. Take some of the fake news or the anti-fake news sites like Alt News, which operates out of Ahmedabad. It's operating only out in English and in Hindi. Take Boom Live. It's operating only out of in English, or SM, Social Media Hoax Layer. There are other organizations also. We need fact-checking bodies, and we need fake news, I wouldn't say busting, but websites that point out fake news in as many languages as possible. This is the need, the crying need for this country. That would mean, where will they get the money from? Is a question. We need public spirited individuals. We need trusts and foundations, including bodies like the IPSMF, the Independent and Public Spirited Media Foundation, to financially support these kinds of initiatives which would point out fake news in different languages. And I think to start with, we would need at least in about 10 or 11 languages, the 4 languages of southern India, Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, then the 2 major languages of Western India, Marathi and Gujarati, the 3 major languages of Eastern India, that's like Oriya, Bangla and Ohmiya, and then of course you have Urdu besides Hindi and English. So I would say you should have initiatives in at least these 11 or 12 languages. If and I think, I don't know what is the best way forward. Perhaps organizations such as NALSAR could take the initiative in putting together such teams who would be looking at fake news in non-English or non-Hindi languages.
Yeah, I'm trying to persuade my students to write about fake news in all Indian languages, short articles. So let me see how much of that will work. The next question is, I think before I actually ask the students to, in your NewsClick articles, in article number 3, you mentioned that fake news is now even outsourced, so that no digital footprints can be seen.
You would like me to add to this?
Yeah, please, because we really don't know where this outsourcing and how does it happen, and who is interested in taking up such outsourced work.
So money, it's money all the way. Who are trolls? Who are these trolls? They are typically young individuals, and they are said by some interested party that, look, I want you to target 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are the following individuals. I'm going to give you instructions what to do. I'm going to gift you a computer which may cost 50,000, 60,000 rupees. So I'm going to give you mobile phones with 7 or 8 or 10 mobile phones with SIMs. I want you to take out a few hours every day, and you'll get instructions as to this is what you should do. Abuse A, B, C, D. So it could be a political party targeting its political opponents. It could be a commercial organization targeting its business rivals. These are paid for. Typically, and this is something to do with also human behavior. You find some people who are otherwise very mild-mannered, who are very polite in their demeanor. Online, they become vicious. They become abusive. They use terrible language. And this is taken advantage of. What has been happening, I understand, is that Indian organizations have been given money to troll or spread fake news in different parts of the world. That means if you know Portuguese, we'll tell you how to do it for Brazil. If you know Spanish, we'll tell you how to do this for Argentina. So, sitting far away, they're doing it. You know Urdu, we're going to tell you what to do, how to go in Pakistan. So, this is a little more specialized. But at the end of the day, when there are so many young people who don't have jobs, who are not properly employed, if you offer money, they're willing to do it. And for them, these ethical issues don't matter. It's unfortunate, and very often, if these are organized, they make them sign non-disclosure agreements and go ahead. I mean, we've seen organizations that started as very innocuous social welfare organizations to help women and children. They get transformed, they morph into organizations which literally hire battalions of trolls and spread fake news in different parts of the world. It's unfortunate that India has also become a ground for these kinds of activities. You know, we said we are proud that we are the IT, what should I say, the IT hub of the world. I mean, it's often said as a way of a comparison that 1 out of 4 computer software engineers have their origins in the Indian subcontinent. But then I quickly add after that 1 out of 4 persons on this planet who's poor, who's illiterate, who's underprivileged, who's malnourished is also a person of Indian origin.
Right. Yeah. So I just have one last question about the press council report that you have documented. You have argued for more powers to the press council so that it could probably initiate certain action against fake news disseminators, etc. But my question is, see, in India today, we have an independent election commission or independent judiciary with certain powers. If all of them, people are saying these institutions have been in many ways manipulated or have gone into the hands of the ruling party, either the Congress before or more now in BJP's hands. So how is press council going to have some kind of insulation? How is it going to insulate itself from the powers?
Okay. See, I believe today the Press Council of India needs to be drastically revamped. The Press Council, as I mentioned earlier, is a quasi-judicial body set up by an act of parliament. Its head is invariably a retired judge. Why? Why should it not be a senior journalist? That's a question number one. Second point, the Press Council of India has no punitive powers. It cannot punish. It can at best admonish or censure somebody. It cannot levy a fine. Forget putting somebody behind bars. Recently something happened, and I'll give you an example. Earlier there was a suggestion that the Press Council of India should direct the government body within the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, that's the DAVP, the Directorate of Audiovisual Publicity, to deny advertising to publications that are repeated offenders. They are habitual offenders. Only recently, just a few years ago, they did it. And it worked. In the past, when the Press Council of India had asked the Information and Broadcasting Ministry and the DAVP to act, the DAVP did not act. Interestingly, both these organizations come within the administrative control of the same ministry, that's the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. So, the point to note is that is the Press Council of India, how relevant is it today? Yes, people haven't stopped reading, but people are reading less and less on pieces of paper. Maybe that's good for the environment. But people are reading more and more on screens, on their handsets, on their laptops, on their desktops. So
No,
it's not.
I would agree with your suggestion, but the question is it really going to be allowed to function autonomously and independently?
You know, having been a part of the council for 3 years, I'm not particularly optimistic. But what I do believe is you need a kind of like a communications commission. There are examples from across the world. We have the FCC, for instance, the Federal Communications Commission of the United States. We have Ofcom, the Office of Communications of the UK. We have similar bodies in Canada, in Germany, in France, in Australia.
Yeah.
So maybe you need a different kind of what I would say, a constitutional authority with powers to punish, punitive powers. And you also need to discuss a little bit about how this body should be constituted, who should be its members. So I think it's a very, very important point that you've raised. The thing is, the Press Council of India, in its present form, is increasingly being marginalized and almost rendered itself, what should I say, a superfluous body. You know, I completely agree with you that many institutions in this country have not just been manipulated, but also compromised. And since you brought this up, the Election Commission of India, let me bring to your notice something that happened before the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. The Election Commission of India had set up its own committee, comprising officials of Nirvachan Sadan itself. It had representation from other government departments and ministries, like the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, like the whole issue of METI, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and this whole issue about social media platforms call themselves intermediaries. They don't call themselves publishers. Facebook and Google are tech companies, not publishers. So they are given certain safe harbor provisions in the intermediary rules in the Information Technology Act. But there are restrictions. So if you put out some fake, false information and there's a complaint against you either by a judicial authority or by a police force or by a statutory authority, you are supposed to take down that content. But this does not apply to citizens. You can complain about something, but they're not obliged to listen to you. It's only if a police officer or a police department sends a formal complaint or a court of law or a government department that they would wake up. Now this is the classic case, as I said, of T. Raja Singh. They had so many complaints against him, but they did not act. They finally declared him as a dangerous individual after a long time. Now the Election Commission of India, I'm coming back to this. This committee had put out a set of suggestions, including the whole issue of intermediary guidelines and safe harbor provisions. But the Election Commission did nothing. When there was a hue and cry about it, they called the industry, they called a body called the IAMAI, Internet and Mobile Association of India, and put out what was called a voluntary code of conduct. And as all voluntary code of conduct goes, there are no statutory backing. It's a voluntary code. So this is exactly what happened. And as a result of which, the Election Commission of India did not act, or certainly did not act adequately to check the proliferation of fake news, false news. Expenditure on political advertising. What is a political ad? How do you account for it in your calculation of expenditure of registered political parties? Before the elections, you had a television channel which was put out on all the cable by all the cable operators who were having these direct-to-home connections or hits. That's a head end in the sky kind of thing. And this was called the NAMO channel. But nobody knows from where it came and where it went. Yeah. There was a very, very classic case where when the Model Code of Conduct was enforced, Prime Minister Modi made an announcement about rockets being launched by the Indian Space Research Organization. And interestingly, he didn't put it out on Doordarshan. It was put out on YouTube. So the question is, if we allow international digital media monopolies to, in a sense, become superpowers. I mean, they seem to be above the laws of the land. Yes, they are huge, they are great. But if for them virality is a business imperative, if for them the laws of individual countries or individual nation states don't matter, then we are living in a very, very difficult and we have a very, very problematic situation on our hands.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I think our students can ask questions. Please introduce yourself, your name, and then ask the question.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Pival.
I beg your pardon. Will you repeat your name, please?
My name is Pival, sir.
P-I?
P-I-V-A-L. Pival.
Okay. Yes, Pidal. Go ahead, please.
So it's Pival.
P-I-V-A-L, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Pival. Yes, please. Go on, Pival.
All right. My question was basically that although fake news is now being propagated at unprecedented levels, but could also one source of our anxiety be that we were never more aware about all of this? That with the onslaught of education and in general awareness about fake news, which is leading to a further case of anxiety, whereas the phenomenon, because fake news itself is not actually new.
So you want me to react to what you said?
One of the reasons that you mentioned regarding fake news and how it's going to be a very big social issue right now was that it was never propagated in this manner earlier ever. But my thing was that apart from that, there's also the other angle that we were never aware about fake news being this present.
Okay. So let me react to what you have said, Pival. It's a very, very important point that you made. The source of anxiety that you talk about is not just because of greater awareness. Here, I would beg to differ with you, saying there is greater awareness among a certain section of the population, among people like you, who have been privileged, who come from a certain social and economic strata of society, people who are privileged to have education. You see, unlike, I mean, education is problematic. In the last census that took place in this country, which was in 2011, according to the government of India's own data, close to 1 out of 4 Indians could not read or write her or his name. That is a definition of literacy which you may or may not go along with. All I can say, that's a particular definition of literacy which the government of India said, that close to 1/4 of your population is unable to read or write her or his name. That means they are still using a thumb impression on an official document. Now, if this number in the last 10 years, and we are still not sure when the 2021 census will happen, it should have under normal circumstances have started by now, but we are not living in normal circumstances. We have a pandemic and a terrible economic situation. So we don't know exactly when the next census will be. But let's assume that instead of 1/4, it's now 20%, or let's assume it's 15%. You still have a fairly large number of people who are, to use your word, still not educated. And levels of awareness would vary from the kind of education. I go back to what Ravish Kumar had said. Why are so many people believing what they hear or what they read on WhatsApp? Because they have had no other opportunity. Let me come to your specific issue of source of anxiety. One of the reasons for the source of anxiety is because these large digital social media platforms also make us live in echo chambers. This is essentially what social psychologists would call a confirmation bias. I only want to hear what I want to hear. I don't want to hear a viewpoint which is different from mine. I'm a supporter of the Congress. I don't want to hear what the BJP has to say. Or I am a supporter of the BJP. I don't want to hear. So the point is our behavior. Once again, I repeat what I said. It's not just what we eat, our favorite color, the clothes we wear, the films we watch, the music we listen to, but our preferences, our ideological preferences, our political preferences are all being closely tracked and monetized by the likes of Google and Facebook. So they believe that you would like to be in an echo chamber. Now you would like to say, I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I want to get out of this confirmation bias. But the algorithms target you in a particular manner. In my opinion, this also adds to your source of anxiety about the kind of information that you can consume. So that's my suggestion to you would be diversify your interests, diversify your reading habits, diversify your sources of information. A lot of people ask me, what's your favorite newspaper? I said, I have 10 favorite newspapers. I said, what's your favorite website? I said, I have 15 favorite websites. Today, that's the huge advantage that you have. Access to information is more than ever before in the history of humankind. If you're willing to pay for it, it's amazing, but. And this is really, what kind of information do you want? Are you going to be falling in, are you going to remain in the echo chamber or come out of that echo chamber? Now, for instance, this is where we again come to business models. The New York Times is arguably the only major media organization in the world who's now getting half of its revenues from subscriptions. Now, most of us want everything free. Do you want a trusted source of information? Are we willing to pay for that information? So, if advertising is not going to be your model and you're not going to be vulnerable to the dissemination of fake news, then are you willing to pay for quality news? This is a big question. And as of now, I don't have an easy answer. As I told you, the bulk of the advertising that is happening is hogged by these two organizations. The old traditional media organizations are in a mess, and post-COVID, many of them are already on the verge of being finished. In the National Capital Region where I come from, at least 500 journalists have lost their jobs in the last 5 months, and maybe twice that number have had to accept very, very deep salary cuts. This is the state of the media. If you look at what's happening across India, then that number is far more. So, it's a very, very, very difficult period. And I would say a period which could well go down as sort of defining moments or historical moments. I mean, there's so many aspects of that history that we are not realizing, that we are actually living through that period of history. I mean, for instance, look at migration. In the months of April, May, and June, or late March, April, May, we've seen the biggest internal migration of human beings, perhaps in the history of humankind. That's a completely unrelated issue. But in the same way as I talk about internal migration, in terms of dissemination of information, dissemination of fake news, propaganda, I think we are also living in times which we've never experienced before, and we don't know where it's going to end. The New York Times at one level had spearheaded a move to make Facebook and Google pay. They say, you call yourself a tech company, not a media company. You are distributing our content. We have spent money, our reporters, our analysts, our artists, our graphic designers. They put out the content, and you're hogging the lion's share of the revenue. Is this fair? Australia is the first country in the world who's actually said, Google and Facebook, we are going to enact a law to make you pay for the content content you disseminate. Two important things have happened in Facebook and Google. Google has said they're going to themselves curate content and actually pay for content. They say quality content. And Facebook, a few months ago, set up an oversight committee comprising eminent public figures from across the world to look into, examine instances of fake news, false information, and it's a separate trust that has been set up, and apparently it has powers to overrule even the owners and the founders of Facebook, that is Mr. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, his second in command. So let's see where we go from here. We're going through actually tumultuous times. The way we talk, the way we communicate with one another, just as our own societies will probably never be the same again post-COVID.
Thank you for answering the question, sir. I mean, my question was actually on similar lines, that although education right now is pretty low, but it is almost the highest ever that it's been. So that was where I was coming from, but then I did get your point. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pival.
Hi, sir. I'm Sisir.
Hi, Shishir.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short. Sir, you said that the only way to deal with the problem right now is through education by increasing awareness. We had Mr. Pratik Sinha over a few days ago, and he agreed. But my concern is more that it doesn't just sound difficult. To me, it sounds impossible because of a few problems. One is we are an educationally backward country, and I think it will be really hard to get people to care about the credibility of facts. Two is a lot of people, when fact checked, when they're confronted with the fact that they have in fact said something that isn't true, they automatically attack the credibility of the fact checker. Organizations like Alt News and such, they've been called politically biased organizations. Like you said, it's a post-truth era. So do you think it is viable for us to have an education program which would actually work in convincing people?
I completely agree with you. It's not easy, it's very tough. But to say it's impossible, no. I would say we have to try. As Professor Manohar himself said, it's important to initiate digital literacy programs. It's become very, very important. It's arguably become more important than ever before. That to not just inform people and make them aware of the implications of, what is hate speech at the end of the day? Do people understand what hate speech is? Do people understand how hate speech and false and fake information is behind mob lynching? What is a mob lynching? When do a large group of people get together and sort of completely lose their sense of right and wrong, apparently abdicate their social responsibilities, and become a part of a mindless group of people who says burn, kill? Now, when does that happen? What are the social, political forces that happen and that create this environment? So these are not easy questions that I have like ready-made answers for. But all I wanted to tell you that don't say it's impossible. Try and make it possible. It's tough. It's very tough. I acknowledge that it's bloody tough. But people like you who are aware and who are, in a sense, privileged, you have to do your bit. All of us have to do our bit to inform and to make those who are less privileged than us, make them aware of the importance of understanding credibility of information, factual correctness of it. We can go on and discuss what is objective. What is objectivity? You can get philosophical about it. You can have all kinds of philosophical treatises about it. And in fact, they have been written about it. If you go into the history of media ethics, there's so many examples. Let me give you one or two examples just to illustrate a point. The rule, I mean, I'll give you two completely, one old example, both relatively new examples. In the 60s, late 60s, during the Vietnam War, there was a picture that shook the world. This was of a young girl running naked, and behind her there were these fires burning. It was a black and white picture. And it was these napalm bombs that had been thrown. It was in Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken. It is in Vietnam. Now, this became an iconic picture. This is an iconic picture that shook the conscience of large numbers of people across the world. When somebody put it up on Facebook, they said this is going to promote child pornography, and they took it down. And then people had to intervene and say, look, this is not child pornography. I mean, this was just one example I'll give you. I'll give you another example. The FCC and how it acted. The Federal Communications Commission banned a television channel or fined a television channel because during a live broadcast, Janet Jackson, the late Michael Jackson's sister, Justin Timberlake pulled off her dress, and this was meant for young audiences. They were watching the Super Bowl match, this one of the most popular sporting events in the US, and the channel was fined. The channel protested that it's not our fault. They were not supposed to do this. It was a live broadcast. This was not part of the agenda, or this was not part of the script. But the point that I wanted to note is that the Federal Communications Commission told the television channel, you first pay the fine and then you appeal. So that's the law. We don't have such laws in our country. The last example I'll give you, which suddenly came up in the case of Solicitor General Tushar Mehta brought it up. This was a story about Kevin Carter from South Africa. He had taken a picture of an emaciated toddler in Sudan, and there was a vulture eyeing it. And he waited till both the vulture and the child were in the frame, and he took a picture. And then he shooed away the vulture. But that picture, he said, aroused the conscience of the world because it brought to light the terrible famine that was going on in Sudan. But it made it to the front page of the New York Times. It won the Pulitzer Prize. But the person who took the picture, he was a very disturbed person. He eventually committed suicide. So again, we have many of these instances of what is ethical, what is illegal, we know. But ethics goes beyond law. It has to do something with our notions of right and wrong, good and bad, virtue and vice. So I'm sort of digressed a little bit to respond to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sachin.
Hello, sir. This is Mayuka.
Yes, Mayuka.
Sir, thank you for such a wonderful session, sir. It was very informative and helpful. Sir, I
Thank
have
you.
a similar question like Sis's question. So, sir, what's your opinion about websites which are meant to be fake, like the troll websites, which post satirical news, which are meant to be taken as satire and not as actual news, but their names are very realistic, and they just change a little bit from the name of actual website, like Washington Post or Atlantic, which just change the letters and post satirical news. And about the conspiracy theory websites also. Can just awareness be enough to address this issue?
Okay. Very good question you've asked, Mayuka. Firstly, let me say that if a website says I'm a satirical website, I'm poking fun, I'm joking, I'm pulling somebody's leg, I'm not, I mean, when it's disclosed right up front that this is a satirical website, then it doesn't matter. Then you can at least say the website concerned has made full disclosure. The problem really is the lack of transparency in the way many of these digital giants work. We don't know who is in charge in Facebook for putting down information. We don't really know all these. So, I mean, for instance, there was this, you can say that there have been instances of satirical posts which have been looked on as real. But transparency is a bigger issue. Are you being transparent about the way you work? Are you transparent? You know, at the end of the day, algorithms are not made by machines, they're made by human beings. So machines can do that much and no more. But you know, Mayukha, I really wonder if we are going to move towards a situation where there'll be greater transparency and full disclosure. Once you have full disclosure, then you can say many things can be, you can justify. But that doesn't really, the restrictions on free speech, where do you draw the line? You saw what happened in Charlie Hebdo's case in France. The present head of the government of France says they did the right thing. Earlier in Denmark, there was this case, they put out pictures, all ostensibly to promote free speech, but which was seen to be against a particular religion, notably Muslims. Now, again, we here come back to, say, in India, Article 19.2. So Article 19.1a says this is a fundamental right, freedom of expression. But the problem with the interpretation of Article 19.2 is who decides what is a reasonable restriction on the right to free speech. Is it your local police officer, your station house officer, your local constable? Is it the Inspector General of Police? Is it your magistrate? Is it the Chief Justice of India? Or what is worse, is it the mob? Is it your neighbor? Is it the ruffian who lives across the road? So the problem is 19.2, the definition of reasonable restriction is so wide and capable of being interpreted in so many ways that it becomes problematic. I mean, who decides what is a reasonable restriction on the right to free speech? And here again, we've seen a lot of case laws and something. I mean, the most recent one being the Prashant Bhushan case. I mean, is the tweet he did against Justice Bobde, is it contempt of court? Okay. I mean, okay, the Chief Justice of India doesn't have a helmet, he doesn't have a mask, he's riding on a stationary Harley-Davidson bike which belongs to a BJP leader. But then Prashant Bhushan says there's lockdown in the Supreme Court. He says, no, there's no lockdown, we're having virtual hearings. All right. Second tweet. Last 4 Chief Justices of India have whatever undermined and destroyed the reputation, etc., etc., etc. So he's attacking not individual judges, but the institution as a whole, contempt of court. Look, one thing I would say, and I recently interviewed Prashant Bhushan on this, one of the positive fallouts of this whole judgment and him being fined 1 rupee and him being convicted for contempt of court is that once again is brought to light the issues regarding free expression, the right to free expression. I have a book called Sue the Messenger. You know, it was published, I'm the co-author of this book. It was published in 2016 May. So it's everybody's right to sue. You have a right to sue me. But what we have documented in this book are quite a few examples of how legal harassment by large corporates in India, how it undermines democracy, how it shackles reportage. Essentially, the phenomenon of what we call slaps or strategic lawsuits against public participation and how it has a chilling effect. So once again, we enter into areas where different people will have different points of view. And I'm sure in your institution, you'll be having a longer discussion on Article 19.2. I'm not really qualified to speak about it. I did make a documentary film in 2013 on freedom of expression. It's available on YouTube. You can have a look at it. It's a 52-minute film called Freedom Song. It was co-directed by me and Subhi Chaturvedi. The producer is the Public Service Broadcasting Trust. It talks about 2012-13, the whole issue of free speech. It talks about banning of books, among other things. And it talks about the Streisand effect. And before I take the next question, let me tell you this little story about Barbara Streisand. Barbara Streisand is a very popular Hollywood singer, actor, and she sued a photographer for taking pictures of her beachside home. This photographer had hired a helicopter or an aircraft, I don't remember what, and taken pictures of her home, ostensibly because it was violating certain coastal zone regulations. And she sued this guy for breach of, so invading her privacy, taking pictures of her own home, her residence without her prior permission. Now, very few people had seen the picture, but after she sued the photographer, as they say, the pictures went viral. So there are some unintended consequences also of litigation. I'm sorry I've digressed from your question to just share a few random thoughts.
Oh, so thank you so much.
Yeah,
Should answer the
Google has photographed the whole world, every house.
I
They
know.
have not been sued by anyone.
No, from the top. And then they had this plan called the street, Google Street or something, to take your front. So taking it from the top, they front.
Yeah.
And there was a recent video I saw of a gentleman who could fool Google. He had a cart where he had quite a few mobile phones, and they were all rigged in a particular way. So the Google Maps went bonkers for a while.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll just now collect all the questions, and then you could probably just go one by one.
Yes, sure. I can see the chat box, but I can't see the message.
Yeah, I think in the chat box there are no questions yet.
I can't see, yes. I can't see any questions on the chat box, unless there are some questions which you can see as the host and I cannot.
Oh, okay. Anyway, there are no questions in the chat box, so I don't know why you can't see. Maybe it's blocking you.
No, there are none in the chat box. Maybe there is elsewhere.
They can ask.
They can ask. Anybody can ask. I don't know how many people are participating in this, sir.
Well, when we began, we had, excluding you and I, there were 10 more, and up to 20.
Mhm.
And after 4:30, like our students are, some of them, I don't know whether they have any other activity, because originally it was scheduled from 3 to 4:30. So after 4:30, some 8 have disappeared.
So it's 12.
Yeah, now it's back to 12.
Okay, I'll be very happy if there's anybody else who wishes to ask a question.
Sir, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sir, my name is Soham, sir.
Yes,
So,
Soham.
Can you switch
just
on the video if possible so that we can see you?
Yes, sir.
Anyway, it's not an obligation, only if you can.
Soham Chakraborty.
Yes, sir.
So we have Debroti from Bangladesh
Oh, I see.
who introduced you.
And Soham also appears to be a Bengali.
Yes, sir.
নমস্কার দেবারতী, তুমি বাংলাদেশ থেকে?
হ্যাঁ স্যার আমি বাংলাদেশি।
Okay, please Soham, continue.
Yes, sir. So as we know, one of the largest advertisers is the government. So what happens is, often though the government, like as you said, many leaders have paid, like bought news to be published in different newspapers having the same article but with different names. Often instead of doing that, what the government does is that if the newspaper is not publishing something which it is not liking, it moves the advertisement away from the newspaper and uses its financial muscle to maybe get the newspaper around to publish what it likes. So this is one of the
major issues which recently even Shekhar Gupta also pointed out in his YouTube channel. So, sir, you were a member of the press council for a long time, so sir, can you, from your experience, tell how we can tackle this issue and as to how we can make it more equitable for to ensure the government does not use its financial muscle to get the newspapers to produce views which are favorable to it?
Thank you, Soham. I think that's a very good question that you've asked. It has also reminded me about some other points which I could have mentioned earlier, but I did not. So first, let me here point out two aspects. As I mentioned, after 2008 and particularly after COVID, expenditure on advertising in the mainstream media, when I say mainstream, I mean print, radio, television, has either come down or stagnated, or in countries like India, the rate of change or the rate of growth has slowed down. So it has decelerated. After accelerating at a very, very phenomenal pace all the way right through the 80s, right through the 90s, and it's only really in the towards the after the first 5 or 8 years of the new millennium that this phenomenon happened. Now, what does this mean? And this is where India comes in. You find that many of the Indian newspaper, media organizations, television channels, radio is, of course, by the way, India is perhaps the only major democracy in the world where news and current affairs on the radio is still a monopoly of the government. I cannot think of other democracies where news and current affairs on radio is still monopolized by the government. And I am completely opposed to all the justification that has been given by the government. There is a judgment which is in the Supreme Court, which I think has been reserved for last several years. We are all waiting to hear the judgment. I'm an interested party, Common Cause. I'm a member of the Governing Council of Common Cause, and we we were among the petitioners. Common Cause also sought to move the government to say that when there are public sector or government departments that are advertising, you're spending public money. You're spending money that belongs to the people. You're spending money that the taxpayer has given you to promote your whatever your schemes are, whatever your projects are, whatever your achievements are. Why should the leader's picture also be there? Today, I cannot think of a single government advertisement which does not have the Prime Minister's picture. I cannot think of a single petrol pump in the country which is telling you how LPG or cooking gas cylinders are given to poor people, which does not have a picture of the Prime Minister. Now, in my opinion, it's legal, but not ethical. This is my personal view. And it's not just advertising. You are completely right. Because of the shrinking of advertising, the relative dependence of Indian media organizations on advertising support from the government, from the union government in Delhi, from the state governments, has grown up relatively. And this explains why such a large section of the media in India has become so uncritical of the government today. I mean, look, the job of the journalist is to be critical of whoever is in positions of power and authority. That's a marker of a democracy. You wouldn't be able to call yourself a democracy if the media didn't ask difficult questions. Then the media can't be expected to play the role of the advertising agency or the public relations firm. But Mr. Modi has not given any, he's the first Prime Minister of India to have not given any public press conference where unscripted, spontaneously, people can ask him questions. The interviews he's given have been to people who he's chosen, and you've heard these interviews and you often found that these interviews, certain kinds of questions are not asked, certain kinds of answers are not followed up with questions. But it's not just advertising, which the government picks and chooses and discriminates against the media depending on which particular media is seen to be more favorably inclined towards them or not. Furthermore, it's not just it's sponsorship of events which are organized by television channels, by newspapers, by other media organizations. The government also decides where to go, where not to go. And that is also another way of picking and choosing, what they say, cherry picking, and discriminating against particular media organizations. And all of this helps in controlling the media. So the media, instead of holding truth to power, instead of holding accountable those who are in positions of power and authority, instead of asking difficult questions to those who are abusing or misusing their discretionary powers, the media ends up becoming the Godi media, the lapdog. Not a watchdog, but the lapdog. So that is unfortunate but true. And this has had a huge impact, I believe, on not just the mass media in this country, but also our political processes and elections and election outcomes as well. তোমার প্রশ্নের জবাব দিতে পেরেছি?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, ধন্যবাদ।
So I burst into Bengali, Professor Manohar, for Soham and Debaroti, please.
So, hi, this is Gayatri. So, in the beginning, you said how internet was supposed to be this open platform, quickly got dominated by few big companies. So, this is a recent or like the antitrust proceedings which have been started in the US and European Union against Facebook or Amazon. Do you think whether they would be successful, and if yes, if like we're able to break down these big businesses, it would have a positive impact on controlling the issue of fake?
I'm again very happy that you've asked this question, Gayatri. Yes, if Elizabeth Warren had become the president of the US, then things would have been different, but she's not even in the race. Elizabeth Warren was in fact, if I remember, the only major political leader of the US who openly said Google and Facebook needs to be broken up. And if you recall, there are precedents. There have been two instances of large multinational corporations whose activities by law, by statute, have been broken up. One was, of course, the company that was set up by Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, Bell Laboratories, and then AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph. By law, it had to fragment itself. It was broken up into smaller entities that had to compete with one another. The other example is that of Standard Oil, SO, where this thing happened. But I'm not so sure whether it will happen. Certainly, I don't see it happening under a Republican administration, because these are all US-based organizations. I certainly don't see it happening if Trump returns to power. We'll have to wait and watch what happens if there's a change in November and if it's a Biden administration. But what I wanted to say is that this whole issue of governance of the internet, should the internet be governed? Can the internet be governed? What is a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance? Who are the players? The governments, the United Nations bodies, and there are multiple United Nations bodies. There is ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. There is UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Social, and Cultural Organization. Then the trade-related matters, you can get into intellectual property rights, trade-related intellectual property rights. It's not just pharmaceuticals, it's also works of art and copyright issues which come. The World Trade Organization, though it's not part of the UN, it's there. So there have been talks. Whether it'll happen, very, very difficult to say. Who are the other stakeholders? What about the corporates? What about technologists? What about scholars? Most important, what about civil society? Who represents you and I? If there is to be a multi-stakeholder kind of a model for internet governance, assuming there is need for internet governance, at the end of the day, how do you perceive the internet? How do you perceive information? Is it a public good? Is it like the water you drink? Is it the land on which your food is grown? Is it the air that you breathe? Should the internet be treated like a public utility? And if it is, what should be the rules and the regulations and the norms of governance for the internet? These are bigger questions. And these are very, very important questions. And across the world, this debate is going on, and I think it's going to continue for some time. But you see, until and unless more and more people speak up and say, look, yes, the internet has given us a lot. It's changed human society. But there is that dark side of that internet. And that dark side of the internet goes beyond pornography. It goes beyond the dark net where contraband, where drugs and arms and illegal substances and endangered species of animals and stolen antiques are sold. So there is that other side of the internet, which is all about fake news, disinformation. So, Professor Manohar,
Yes, sir.
I think thanks to your students, I've been able to widen the scope of our discussion quite a bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe one last question if anyone has. Otherwise, we will now close the session. Yeah, I think Debroti wants to ask last question. Yes,
Sir,
Debroti.
yeah, I had a very basic question regarding the education system. So when we have an education system which is not neutral to say the least, which provides us material with like selective history or pushing us towards a certain political ideology or things like that, and we have teachers who are like who prejudice us in some ways and all that. So is the education system is it really equipped to battle this phenomena of fake news when there are certain fake news which feed what you said, the confirmation bias, which feeds into our confirmation bias and may make the fake news, if not right, certainly more acceptable than other fake news? So the education system, is it really equipped as it is right now to handle this problematic phenomena?
Okay. Devaruti, both my parents were born and brought up in what is today Bangladesh. What was then first East Bengal, then East Pakistan. They didn't have fake news of that time. There was rumors, there were malicious rumors, there were communal conflagrations. Is the educational system equipped? If the education system is not equipped, the education system must be equipped, because it is only the education system that can teach and train and raise awareness among young people like you, among ordinary citizens, what is right and what is wrong, what is fake and what is genuine, what is credible and what is propaganda. Only an education system, only a strong education system can do it. This issue of neutrality and bias, you talked about net neutrality. Facebook wanted to say net neutrality. It didn't work out. Because it's like telling this is a library, you can read these books here free, but you can't read those books, you have to pay for them. Okay, I'm offering you food, but I'll give you dal and I'll give you rice. But if you want vegetables, then you have to pay for it. Or if you want something else, some non-vegetarian food, you have to pay for it. No, that's why Facebook, its free basics, never worked in India. But many countries in the world, they've been successful, where Facebook has become virtually synonymous with the internet. This issue of neutrality, none of us are neutral. All of us are biased. Can I justify my bias? Can I say, as a journalist, I am biased against the corrupt? Can I say I am biased in favor of the exploited? So it is not a question of bias, and it's not a question of objectivity. Can we justify our bias? And I think this is really the key issue that we have to handle. And we can't run away from it. And I go back to a point that I had made earlier. We all have to keep in mind that fake news travels much faster and reaches more people and much quicker and reaches many more people than genuine information. But does that mean we stop saying this is fake? Does that mean we stop pointing out what is wrong? No, we have to still doing it. Even if it sometimes feels that, we are banging our head against a wall, we still have to do it. There's a very old proverb. There was a windy night and a person was going from corner to corner. It's an old ancient story, lighting lamps. And he was asked, why are you lighting lamps? Can't you see there are gusts of wind? And he said, so many of the lamps that you've lit are no longer lit because the wind has come and the light has been snuffed out. But he said, there are still some lamps that are burning. So we have to still keep burning those lamps. Thank you, Devaroti, and thank you, everybody, all the students, for giving me this honor, this opportunity. I started a bit late, but I think I more than made up the time. And since there will be some people who were not present on this occasion, you were kind enough, your professor has been kind enough to, will be kind enough to circulate the video. And maybe you can even put it up on YouTube.
Yeah, I think we will do that. And I am not, it's not just my kindness, it is their right. So their right to listen to you. And thank you so much. It's a brilliant session. And thank you also for not just giving your time, but also answering all my questions and the students' questions with a lot of patience. And I hope we will, this is not the last session for the NALSAR students, and I hope we will have you sometime in future when probably all this COVID situation finishes and our students are hoping to get back to the campus.
Thank you very much. I was supposed to once, just before all this happened, one of the students, I think his name is Mandal, I'm forgetting his name, I have to check. He had in fact invited me to talk about media ownership. It was part of a seminar.
Yeah.
But then everything, the campus was closed and nothing happened.
I actually listened to your session at NALSAR in 2016. That was just 1 year before I actually joined NALSAR on media ethics.
Thank you, sir.
So I also asked Pratik Sinha if...
yes, I just learned. Yeah. Pratik is doing good work.
Yeah, no, I made a request to him in case in the future, if we are planning to conduct a workshop, because this is a very small class, and these people are benefited by your talk and Pratik Sinha's, etc. But we have so many other students who would be interested in this. And if there is a workshop, I asked if Mr. Pratik Sinha could help us and come as a resource person. So I make the same request to you.
Sure.
If there is such a workshop, please kindly accept.
Thank you so much. I will be happy to accept your invitation.
Yeah. So thank you so much once again.
Okay. And Professor, I had one small matter to clarify with you. Yeah. After we are through, I'll just give you a telephone call. It's just a small matter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Now students, I'll end the meeting. So see you next week.